Hi friends, happy Tuesday. I'm Teacher Hillary and we are going to read some books about Jackson Pollock. After we are going to do an art project inspired by Jackson Pollock. Let's get started. So, it's our first one. Jackson Pollock splashed paint and wasn't sorry. And here's the back. Inside it says, Jackson Pollock was unlike any other painter. When he painted, he moved. He dripped, splashed, and poured paint over canvases that were rolled out across the floor. And he wasn't sorry. An inspiring story about one of the most important contemporary artists who ever lived. Okay. Jackson Pollock splashed paint and wasn't sorry. These shoes belong to Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock was a painter. He was born in the Wild West of the United States more than 100 years ago. After growing up surrounded by nature, he moved to New York City to study art. Jackson was 18. It was in this great city that Jackson met Lee and Peggy. Lee was a fellow artist who later became Jackson's wife. Peggy was an important lady who collected Jackson's paintings, exhibited them at her gallery, and helped him sell them too. Okay, so here's Jackson, here's Lee or Lee Krasner, and here is Peggy Guggenheim. Look at Peggy's earrings. Do they look familiar? Yeah, she's wearing earrings designed by Alexander Calder. After a few years in the city, Jackson and Lee moved to a farm in the countryside. There, Jackson found the peace and inspiration he needed to experiment with a new way of painting. Jackson didn't like standing in front of an easel with a brush and a palette. When he painted, he moved and would paint and move and paint. How did he do that? Did he paint while turning somersaults? Like this? Or like that? Do you think you could paint while turning somersaults? Or while running across the canvas? Do you think you could paint while running across a canvas? Some things to think about. Or maybe he painted while riding a bike with his brush in his hand. Do you think you could paint while riding a bike with a brush in your hand? Sounds pretty hard. Or while dancing the boogie woogie. What about this? Do you think you could paint while dancing the boogie woogie? That sounds kind of fun. Could he have painted while climbing the Rocky Mountains? What? Do you think that is how Jackson Pollock painted? He was climbing the Rocky Mountains? That seems a little outlandish. Or gliding through the air on a parachute? Do you think that is how he painted? Is that possible? Is it possible to paint while gliding through the air on a parachute? Who knows? What about painting while swimming in a river? Can you paint and swim at the same time? Sounds kind of complicated. Well, he didn't quite paint in those ways, though he probably would have enjoyed trying. And a few artists have painted in those ways, which we can talk about later. Jackson actually painted by walking around a huge canvas that was spread out on the floor. Like that. It's huge. Sometimes he painted in drips, like this. Sometimes he painted by whirling his arms around. He splashed paint using brushes, sticks, and spoons and poured it straight out of a can. Have you painted using a spoon? Or a fork? Jackson was careful with his drips and splashes, making sure the paint landed exactly where he wanted. He painted with the energy and grace of a dancer. When you see Jackson Pollock's paintings, the paint or the line created by the paint is a recording of how he moved around the canvas, like a dance. He painted with rhythm and order, concentrating on every moment until the very last drop of paint fell on the canvas. It's finished. Jackson was unlike any other painter. He did things his own way, with drips, splashes, and movement, and he wasn't sorry. Some people did not like his paintings. Others did not understand them, but Jackson couldn't paint in any other way. When he painted, his heart would beat like a drum, and he could not stay still. People soon began to understand his work, and some even tried painting the same way that he did. His artworks became famous and now hang in museums around the world. Jackson, you did it! That is the end of our story. And here is a little bit more about Jackson Pollock. More about Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock is one of the most famous American painters of all time. He was born in 1912 in Wyoming and grew up in Arizona and California. He was the youngest of 5 children and lived on a farm for much of his childhood. When he was 18, Pollock moved to New York City to train as an artist. There he met his future wife, Lee Krasner, who was also an artist. He also met Peggy Guggenheim, a very rich art collector who asked him to paint her a mural. Pollock was so excited that he took down a wall in his house to bring a 20-foot mural inside to paint. Peggy loved his mural and invited him to have an exhibition at her gallery. Pollock soon became famous for his drip art and for his action painting. His paintings looked messy and unplanned, but he took great care over where the paint would fall and what colors he would use. He was called an abstract expressionist artist, which means his paintings didn't look like any certain thing, but instead they represented his feelings in the expressive marks he made. Pollock died in 1956, but his work continues to inspire many artists to experiment and invent new ways of painting. Okay. And that is the end. Here is a picture of one of Jackson Pollock's paintings. You see all the paint layered and dripped. This painting by Jackson Pollock is called number 1A 1948. It was painted in 1948 with oil paints and enamel on a canvas. The painting is 68 by 104 inches and can be seen at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Okay, that is the end of Jackson Pollock, Splash Paint, and Wasn't Sorry. All right. Let's do an art project, my friends.